we are back again, and today we're going to be in chapter 31 through 34. But before I read to you, I want to show you what Mr. Cody brought home today. Look at how cute! See, look at them. We have 8 of these little baby ones, and then 10. I mean, they're pretty big.
Yeah, they're big.
They're pretty big. So we have 18 ducks, kiddos. But look at the little babies. They're so cute. Okay, Mr. Cody can take them. It peed on me. All right, kiddos, we're going to be in 31 through 34. And what we're going to cover today, it's a skill that we've already covered. I just want to kind of go back and visit it because we kind of struggled with it a little bit last week. And so today we're going to talk about text-to-self connections. Now remember, it's literally connecting the text to ourselves. Okay, so what's going on in the text and how can I relate to that? What's something that's happened in my life that makes me go, oh, I thought I've done that before, or I felt like that before. And so it says, what happens in the text that you have background knowledge of? So this reminds me of. So last time we did this, I saw a lot of connections that were about being sore. So you wrote in the first box where it says what happened in the text, and you told me that Stanley had to dig a hole and he was really sore. And then on your connection, you told me that after basketball practice, I was really sore, so I know how Stanley was feeling, right? When we make text-to-self connections, we take what's happening to Stanley and we ask ourselves, have I ever done that before? Have I ever felt like that before? Is there something I've ever done that kind of sounds like what Stanley's going through? So we're trying to put ourselves in Stanley's shoes and we're trying to say, yeah, like, I've done that. You have something in common with Stanley. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Today we're in chapter 31 through 34. I'm on page 141 to start us off. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone. Mr. Pendanski, the warden, Zigzag, X-Ray, and his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. But mostly, he was angry at himself. He knew he never should have let Zero dig part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him to read. If Zero could dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he should have been able to dig all day and still have the strength to teach. What he should do, he thought, was go after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been helping him dig his hole. Now he had to dig Zero's. He remained out on the lake, digging during the hottest part of the day. Long after everyone else had gone in, he kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero didn't come back. It would have been easy to go after Zero. There was nobody to stop him. He kept thinking that's what he should do. Maybe he could climb to the top of the Big Thumb. It wasn't too far away, and if it was really the same place where his great-great-grandfather found refuge, and if after 100 years or so, water was still there. It didn't seem likely, not when an entire lake had gone dry. Even if they did find refuge on Big Thumb, that's what they're calling the God's Thumb, right? He thought they'd still have to come back here eventually. They'd both have to face the warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea, although he didn't have it quite all figured out yet. He thought that maybe he could make a deal with the warden. He'd tell her where he really found the gold tube, and maybe she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make this deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. She might just say, tell me where you found it or I'll scratch you too. Plus, it would mean X-Ray would get in trouble. She'd probably scratch him up as well. X-Ray would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel into the dirt. By the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counselors sitting guard by the water spigot outside the shower wall. Mr. Pendanski had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. I always knew he was stupid, Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig only 1 hole that next day. As he dug, he kept a constant watch for Zero, but never saw him. Once again, he considered going out onto the lake to look for him, but he began to realize it was already too late. His only hope was that Zero had found God's Thumb on his own. It wasn't impossible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather had felt the urge to climb to the top of that mountain. Maybe Zero would feel the same urge. if it was the same mountain, and if water was still there. He tried to convince himself it wasn't impossible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe Big Thumb was actually some kind of natural water tower that caught and stored the rain. It wasn't impossible. He returned to his tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendanski all waiting for him. "Have you seen Zero?" the warden asked him. "No." "No sign of him at all?" "No." "Do you have any idea where he went?" "No." "You know you're not doing him any favors if you're lying," said Mr. Sir. "He can't survive out there for more than a day or two." "I don't know where he is." All three stared at Stanley as if they were trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Pendanski's face was so swollen he could barely open his eyes. They were just slits. "You sure he has no family?" the warden asked Mr. Pendanski. "He's a ward of the state," Mr. Pendanski told her. "He was living on the streets when he was arrested." "Is there anyone who might ask questions? Some social worker who took an interest in him?" "He had nobody," said Mr. Pendanski. "He was a nobody." The warden thought a moment. "Okay, I want you to destroy all of his records." Mr. Pendanski nodded. "He was never here," said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. "Can you get into the state files from our computer?" she asked Mr. Pendanski. "I don't want anyone in the AG's office to know he was here." He means like Attorney General, okay? That's like a lawyer's office. "I don't think I can erase him completely from all the state files," said Mr. Pendanski. "Too many cross-references. But I can make it so it's very difficult for anyone to ever find a record of him. Like I said, no one will ever look. No one cares about Hector Zeroni." "Good," said the warden. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but X-Ray called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine all in less than a minute. "I never planned to, steal one," he told them. "But sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a deserted area, and, I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me when I'm around a car. The next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel." Stanley lay on his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away or if he'd just gotten used to it. "Hey, caveman," said Twitch. "Do we really have to get up at 4:30? "You get used to it," Stanley told him. "It's the coolest part of the day." He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he'd made it to Big Thumb or what? What would happen if Zero's been out there for 3 days now? What worried him most, however, wasn't that it was too late. What worried him the most, what really ate at his insides, was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Sir told Twitch the requirements for his hole, as wide and as deep as your shovel. Twitch fidgeted. His fingers drummed against the wooden shaft of his shovel, and his neck moved from side to side. "You won't be twitching so much after digging all day," Mr. Sir told him. "You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky." He popped some sunflower seeds in his mouth, deftly chewed them, and spat out the shells. "This isn't Girl Scout camp." The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet, ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? Okay, if you're following along with me, you're seeing that that's written in italics, and what that tells us is that's what Stanley is thinking. Okay, those are Stanley's thoughts. He watched Mr. Sir fill X-Ray's canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot, dry dirt remained in his head. But what could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow alive after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It would take days. He'd need a car. Or a pickup truck. A pickup truck with a tank of water in the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line, then circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the window. The keys were there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath to steady himself and tried to think clearly. He'd never driven before. But how hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he had to do it quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It's too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another breath. Think about this, he told himself. But there wasn't time to think. He flung open the door to the truck and climbed quickly inside. Hey, shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. Put it in gear, shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed. It bounced over a pile of dirt. Suddenly, Stanley was slammed forward, then instantly backward as an airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He had driven straight into a hole. He lay on the dirt, staring at the truck, which stuck lopsided out of the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather this time. This time, it was his own fault. 100%. He had probably just done the stupidest thing he had ever done in his short, miserable life. He managed to get to his feet. He was sore, but didn't think he'd broken any bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck, it banged against his chest as he ran, and every time it hit against him, it reminded him that it was empty, empty, empty. So here goes Stanley, running off into the desert. Not only did he fail to steal the truck, but he didn't even fill up his canteen first. So he goes to save Zero, but Stanley doesn't even have water for himself. Okay? Anything you can relate to so far? Anything Stanley's done, maybe thought about, maybe done something stupid that's gotten you in a lot of trouble before? Any connection that you can make, okay? Chapter 33. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, nobody was chasing him. He could hear voices coming from back by the truck, but he couldn't make out the words. Occasionally, he'd hear the revving of the engine, but the truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed into what he thought was the direction of the Big Thumb, but he couldn't see it in the haze. Walking helped calm him down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted he could make it to the Big Thumb with no water in his canteen, and he didn't want to risk his life on the hope that he'd find refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that, but he was in no hurry. It would be better to return later, after everyone had had a chance to calm down. You think the warden's going to calm down when she finds out Stanley wrecked the water truck? And as long as he'd come this far, he might as well look for Zero. He decided he would walk as long as he could until he was too weak to go any further. Then he'd turn and go back. He smiled and realized that that wouldn't work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought he could go. That way he'd still have the strength to go back. Then he'd have to make a deal with the warden, tell her where he found Kate Barlow's lipstick tube, and beg for mercy. He was surprised by how far out the holes extended. He couldn't even see the campground anymore. But he still kept passing holes. Just when he thought he'd passed the last one, he'd come across another cluster of them, a little further away. Back at the compound, they had dug in a systematic order, row upon row, allowing space for the water truck. But out here, there was no system. It was if every once in a while, in a fit of frustration, the warden would just pick a spot at random and say, "What the hell, dig here." It was like trying to guess the winning numbers in the lottery. Stanley found himself looking down into each hole he passed. He didn't admit to himself what he was looking for. After more than an hour had gone by, he thought he had surely seen the last hole. But then, off to the left, he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes. He saw the mounds of dirt that surrounded them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow-spotted lizards. Their large red eyes looked up at him. He leapt back over the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing after him. He thought he might have seen one leap out of the hole. Remember, guys, in the very beginning, the author gives us some background knowledge on the yellow-spotted lizards. It says they can jump like 11 feet, right? So they could definitely jump out of that hole onto Stanley. He ran until he couldn't run any further, then collapsed. They hadn't come after him. He sat there a while and caught his breath. As he got back to his feet, he thought he noticed something on the ground, maybe 50 yards away. It's about half a football field, kiddos. It didn't look like much, maybe just a big rock, but in the land of nothingness, any little thing seemed unusual. He walked slowly toward it. The encounter with the lizard had made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. He wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, although it didn't seem likely. He turned it upside down and found one seed stuck to the burlap. Lunch. All right, last chapter, kiddos. We're almost there. The sun was almost directly overhead. He figured he could walk for no more than another hour, maybe 2, before he had to turn back. It seemed pointless. He could see there was nothing ahead of him, nothing but emptiness. He was hot, tired, hungry, and most of all, thirsty. Maybe he should turn around now. Maybe he'd already gone halfway and just didn't know it. Then, looking around, he saw a pool of water less than 100 yards away from where he was standing. He closed his eyes and opened them to make sure he wasn't imagining it. The pool was still there. He hurried toward it. The pool hurried away from him, moving as he moved, stopped when he stopped. There wasn't any water. It was a mirage caused by the shimmering waves of heat rising off the dry ground. He kept walking. He still carried the empty sack of sunflower seeds. He didn't know if he might find something to put in it. After a while, he thought he could make out the shape of the mountains through the haze. At first, he wasn't sure if that was another kind of mirage, but the further he walked, the clearer they came into view. Almost straight ahead of him, he could see what looked like a fist with its thumb sticking up. He didn't know how far away it was. 5 miles? 50 miles? One thing was certain. It was more than halfway. He kept walking toward it, although he didn't know why. He knew he'd have to turn around before he got there. But every time he looked at it, it seemed to encourage him, giving him the thumbs up sign. As he continued walking, he became aware of a large object on the lake. He couldn't tell what it was or even if it was natural or man-made. It looked like a little fallen tree, although it didn't seem likely that a tree would grow here. More likely, it was a ridge of dirt and rocks. The object, whatever it was not on the way to the big thumb, but a little off to the right. He tried to decide whether to go to it or to continue toward the big thumb, or maybe just turn around. There was no point in heading toward the big thumb, he decided. He'd never make it. For all he knew, it was like chasing the moon. But he could make it to this mysterious object. He changed directions. He doubted it was anything, but the fact that there was something in the middle of all this nothing made it hard for him to pass up. He decided to make the object his halfway point, and he hoped he hadn't already gone too far. He laughed to himself when he saw what it was. It was a boat, or part of a boat anyway. It struck him funny to see a boat in the middle of this dry, barren wasteland. But after all, he realized this was once a lake. The boat lay upside down, halfway buried in the dirt. Someone may have drowned here, he thought grimly, at the same spot where he could very well die of thirst. The name of the boat had been painted on the back. The upside-down red letters were peeled and faded, but Stanley could still read the name. Mary Lou. What do we know about the name Mary Lou and a boat and Camp Green Lake? It's Sam's boat. On one side of the boat, there was a pile of dirt and then a tunnel leading down below the boat. The tunnel looked big enough for a good-sized animal to crawl through. He heard a noise. Something stirred under the boat. It was coming out. "Hey!" Stanley shouted, hoping to scare it back inside. His mouth was very dry, and it was hard to shout very loudly. "Hey!" the thing answered weakly. Then a dark hand in an orange sleeve reached up out of the tunnel. All right, kiddos, we're going to stop there for today. And remember, you're working to find 2 things that happened in our book today that you can go, hey, I've done that, or I've felt like that. Stanley feels a lot of things through these chapters. He's angry with himself. He's angry with everyone around him. He makes kind of a stupid choice to steal the water truck. He's tired. He's lost. He's hungry. He's thirsty. Find something in there that you can say, I've done that too, or I've felt like that too, and then tell me about it, okay? All right, kiddos, I love you guys. I miss you guys, and I cannot wait to see what your work looks like.